doesn't mean you're going to go out and become an airline pilot. As you see here, again, you have to have a private pilot certificate to start the course. You have to have that medical again. And when you only have to have a class 3 to start the training, but to act as a commercial pilot, you have to have a class 2 medical. And that's a little bit more stringent and only good for a year instead of 2 to 5 years. So, just make sure that you've got the physical ability to do it. The minimum requirements. Now you see there's 250 hours. Well, obviously you're not going to get 250 hours in this course. But if you were already a pilot and you have logged some time as a private pilot, then we can go ahead and do the training to make you a commercial pilot, so long as when you finish the training, you have at least 250 hours of flight time. And what I mentioned is you're not going to go out and get an airline job. Airline pilots require what they call an ATP, Airline Transport Pilot Certificate. And the minimum hours for that is 1,500 hours. So what most people do, and we'll talk about it on the next one, is to become a CFI to build their flight time. And then the same thing, a written test, practical test to get your commercial pilot certificate. Next slide. The last thing I'll talk about is the CFI certificate. And the reason I throw this up here is because, as I said, to get from that 250 hours as a commercial pilot to the 1,500 hours to be an airline pilot, you got to build that time, and that could be very expensive if you're trying to pay for it. So most people, what they do is they become a certified flight instructor, and then they let somebody else pay for their flight time by giving instructions. It requires a class 3 medical, like we've talked about, and you have to already have a commercial pilot certificate prior to completion of the CFI. And the reason I mention that is you can do this training concurrent with the commercial pilot, so that when you finish your commercial pilot, you're already a CFI, and you can immediately start going and training pilots and building your flight time. And it takes 25 hours of dual, 25 hours of ground training, and then the same things affect the amount of time for each individual. Okay, next slide. I'm not going to, I know that Mary talked about the Army credentialing program. Well, I guess this is just a credentialing program, right? Credentialing assistance program. Be more of the National Guard credentialing program. Anyway, go ahead, next slide. This is going to be talking about how that program, how we administer that program. And if I say anything wrong here, Mary, please correct me.
Okay, and just so you know, Army, National Guard falls under Army, so does Army Reserves, and we use the same program. FTA and CA fall under the same Army funding. All
right, so it's similar. It's the same thing. Does it come out of Fort Knox also, the funding?
It sure does. Yeah, that's where the headquarters is.
Yeah, so the lady from Fort Knox is the one that we she sends payments to us for the training. So the way that it works for us, and again, if it's out of sequence or it's not exactly the way, Mary can correct it, but the way that the one has been working for the guys, active duty guys over at Fort Hood, is they learn about the program, so they come to us and say, what do I have to do? Well, we found that the Education Center wants a invoice, or an estimate, I guess you will, of what the training costs. So we determine what course that the person wants to do, and then we'll put together an estimate for that on our letterhead, and they take that to the Education Center, and the Education Center processes the application. Now, we have helped with the education, or helped, I say, some of the guys bring in a form that we help them fill out, and I'm not sure what you use there at the Guard Education Center, but it's a form that they'll come in and they may not know exactly what all of the course involves and what things they get for it. So we'll help them fill that out too. Then they take that back to the credentialing office, education center, and I guess from there they process the application. And once we get, what will happen next is we'll get notified by Fort Knox, the education center at Fort Knox, that they've been approved, and they'll actually do a payment to us over the telephone. And they will also notify the applicant. And since we have the information too, we'll go ahead and call the applicant too and let them know that we've been funded. So, and then once we get the funding, we'll set an appointment for you to come in and begin enrollment. You have to bring the following documents. If it's for the initial private pilot, as I said, you have to have a passport or a birth certificate and a valid government ID. And if you've already completed it, bring your medical in also. The all other courses will need the pilot certificate, a medical certificate, a government ID, usually driver's license, logbook. If you've got some time log, well, you would have had some time log if you have another, if you're going to do one of the other courses. So you need to bring your logbook in so we can see what training you have, and a proof of your last flight review, which if you're a pilot, you'll know what that is. And I'm missing something. I can't see it because there's a bar on the bottom. Okay, the whole process should take about an hour to an hour and a half to do the enrollment. Next slide. All right, then you'll go into scheduling. Now, we try to be as flexible as possible with the scheduling. You will work with your instructor and develop a schedule that fits your work schedule and other issues that you may have. It's kind of tough, right? Back in the winter time, we had a little bit of a problem in that the Army, the active Army guys, their commanders weren't really letting them off during the duty day to do this. So we were flying strictly evenings and weekends. And in the winter, when it gets dark so early, you can't do a lot of flying. You need to learn how to fly in the day before you learn how to fly in the night, which we do teach you. But we're having a problem with scheduling because everybody needed to fly on the weekends. So what we did is, you know, I would advise people that if they can, they need to try to fly as much as they can during the week. Because, you know, we have limited airplanes, limited instructors. If everybody's flying on the weekends, then you're going to have a hard time scheduling. But upon completion of the enrollment, we'll assign you a flight instructor, and that they'll contact you, evaluate your situation, develop that tailored program for you. You'll be entered into our online scheduling program called Flight Schedule Pro, and there's a screenshot of it below there. And it's you'll be able to access that online from anywhere you're at, and you can schedule yourself. Now, normally, initially, your instructor is going to do the scheduling, but there may come a time when he says, "Go ahead and schedule us for, you know, flights in the future." The Flight Schedule Pro also keeps track of your flight time. Now, you'll have to have a logbook and keep a logbook too, but this keeps track of your flight time, and this is how we bill the flight time against the funding that we've received for you. And then it also keeps a very accurate record of your training. And I think that's pretty much it, isn't it? Is there another slide? You want to go to the next slide, Mary?
I believe I just clicked it. This was the summary.
Oh, okay. I thought there was one that said questions, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's, I think, after.
Yeah. Anyway, that's pretty much it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gary.
Open it up to questions.
Lots of really good information. Before we kind of go on to some of the Army cool and address some of the questions in the chat, do you guys have any specific questions for training or eligibility that you want to ask Gary? please feel free to unmute yourself or type it in the chat.
Hey, Gary.
Oh.
It's Chief Livy, the state of Maine. Just a quick question on how long is a Army flight physical good for?
Your Army flight physical is good as a Class 3 for 1 year. And it's
Check,
not good for a Class 2 or 1 at all.
Thank you.
Hey, Gary, how you doing? This is Juan Fajardo. I had a quick question for you. So I'm in New Jersey, but I'm setting up like the airport that I'm using. That's where I obtained my private pilot license before on my own. They've never heard of this program or have used it. Was there anything at your airport when you initially set this program up that you had to do to be approved to be part of the program?
Yes, I was invited to, and I'm not exactly sure. See, there was a test program initially, and it was only at Fort Hood and Fort Campbell, I think. And
yeah, that's the pilot program. It was actually open to the National Guard as well for Texas. But I'm actually going to go over how to invite vendors to become CA approved. So, Gary, if you want to add more to what it was like for you, you're more than welcome, but I will be covering that.
Yeah, it's just they gave me a questionnaire, and I filled out the questionnaire, showed what I offered, and then they said I was an approved vendor.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We've got something in the chat. It says, how much of the private pilot license cost can be covered by Army tuition assistance?
Well, isn't tuition assistance and credentialing assistance pretty much the same thing, right?
They come from the same bucket of money, but they're not the same thing.
Okay.
Federal tuition assistance pays for academic courses, and it only pays for tuition. Credentialing assistance pays for credentials, but it also pays for materials, books, exams, fees. So it's a little bit more flexible with what it can pay out.
Well, the fiscal limit's 4,000, as Mary said, and I put in mine too. So you can't really get a full private certificate. A private certificate is going to end up costing, if you have no experience, is going to end up costing about $8,000 at our rates. Now, some other places will be more than that. I don't know that anybody's going to be less, but they might be. And then that does not include the final check ride, which those things are, because of the shortage of pilots, they're charging a lot more for those these days than they used to. So by the time you're finished, expect about $9,000. And the tuition assistance, the way we work it with the private pilot is we do stage 1 of it for the first 4,000, then we do the completion in stage 2 for the second 4,000.
And that's spread out over 2 fiscal years. So let's see, I think Mr. Stevens had that question, can I split my flight training over 2 fiscal years to cover the cost? And the answer is yes. So if you began your credentialing request, say now, and you wanted to start on phase 1, or what was the term you used, Gary?
Stage 1.
Stage 1. And your vendor charges $4,000 for that. Then when you're ready to start stage 2, you'll be in a new fiscal year and have a new $4,000 to access for that. Okay. And any other questions from the chat or from by unmuting your line?
Yeah, I do have kind of an off-the-wall question. Can you use post 9/11 GI Bill to get like a commercial aviation degree and simultaneously use credentialing assistance to kind of bolster your flight hours and kind of expedite that process?
Yeah, the answer is yes, but you've got to find a vendor that the post 9/11 folks will work with. There was a lot of fraud taking place with some of these pilots, private pilot licensure vendors, and so they for a while had suspended most, if not all, of those vendors. So Now the requirements to work with the VA have become much more strict, and so if you're interested in using both of those benefits, you can, but you have to find the right vendor. So when you're doing your search, ask them if they accept VA benefits.
Got it. So you can essentially, kind of double dip there.
Yeah,
like one's at a university program. Yeah.
You're not double. You're just using both of your benefits to help pay for your credential. It would be double dipping if it was paying for the same thing, but you're just using the credentialing assistance program funding for, a portion of your program, and then you're also tapping into that post 9/11 to help you pay for whatever else is eligible, and that can get sticky. So you'll want to do a lot of research and make sure you know what you're paying for up front with the vendor. Does that answer your question? Do you have any follow-up?
Yeah, so if you did the program at a university and then did the
yeah, so you could do you could get a bachelor's using federal tuition assistance, and then you might tap into the credentialing assistance to help you pay for some of your qualifying hours or something like that. And then if you wanted to if you ran out of money for that FY, you could tap into your post 9/11 to help you pay for it.
Thank you. That clears it up.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Good question. We've got a couple more in the chat. It says, how can I find an approved school in my state for this program? We are going to go over that right after questions. I'm going to show you the approved vendor list, and then show you guys how you can send them information if they're not approved yet. And then we've got another question, where else in Texas is this program offered? I'm going to show you that on the approved vendor list, and then more specifically, Austin or Tyler areas. Gary, do any of your pilots come from Austin or Tyler?
I think we have a couple from Austin. I'm not specifically from Tyler. We do have one that is coming out of Waxahachie, which is up in that area. So,
wow.
I mean, we have people that will come and train from other areas, but, it's pretty hard to do that, drive back and forth,
Yeah, I think you said you recommend folks to do it twice a week. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'd recommend you do it at least twice a week.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But you could come down and do 2 flights in one day. It's not the optimal, but it could be done.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute or type it in the chat box, and we will kind of go over some other things here in a second. I think we've addressed all the questions. So thank you so much, Gary. I really appreciate it. And you're more than welcome to stay on with us. I'm going to kind of go over a list of the approved training providers and show these folks what Army Cool looks like. So you're more than welcome to stay with us.
Okay. I might stick for a minute.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. All right, so guys, I'm going to show you now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then get this up and going. Can everybody see Army Cool now? Gary, can you see that? Because I think you're okay, great. So this is where you're going to search for any credential. If you know the credential you want, you're going to click here, full credential search, and type it in. But I'll show you really quick where you can go to add a vendor. So right here, if you're searching for a training provider, first of all, vendors and training providers are the same thing. So I'm sorry if they can be used kind of intermittently. So sorry if that confuses you guys. But what you're going to do is click this and an email will pop up. The vendor is going to say, hey, I am a private pilot's license, or I'm in the CompTIA field. I'd like to become an approved vendor for the Army. So Quiet. Hey. So once that's done, and while we're on this page, what you'll want to do, if you see a credential that isn't on, or if you know of a credential that is not on Army Cool, you can actually recommend one to be added right here. But let's go back to the main page, and I'm going to show you the private pilot's license credential, and kind of what you can do to learn more about other credentials. They all kind of look the same. I know that the browsers have different working capabilities. I'm in Internet Explorer right now, so let's see. I think my Amazon order came because my dog is just going crazy. Maggie, stop. Okay, private pilot's license. Okay, so we're gonna scroll down here and you'll see there are 3 options. So we've got private pilot helicopter, private pilot airplane single engine, and private pilot airplane multi-engine. And so I'm gonna go with this one. Click on that, and it'll open up a new page. And here you're gonna see kind of related occupation. So this is MOS related. You'll see eligibility requirements. And it looks like they don't have it quite all of the exam information listed like they do with other credentials. So let me click a different one and see if this one might show. No. Let's see. Helicopter rating. Nope, it doesn't. So I'm not sure why it doesn't, but like if you were to do CompTIA, it would have eligibility, it would have things as far as like what's included in the exam. Let me just show you real quick while I've got it. So if I were to click CompTIA, it would show you exam, when you need to recertify for this particular credential, some additional certifications that you might want to consider about this particular credential. So information here. If you want a current list of the approved vendors in your area, you're going to click on Army Credentialing Assistance CA Program. So I went to menu here, and then I clicked on Army Credentialing Assistance. Scroll down, and you'll see here approved vendor list 19 May 2020. And that is going to bring up this, which I will show you by sharing my screen with you over here. Let's see. Okay, so you should be able to see now an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of certificate names and vendors. And so as of May 19th, there are 347 approved training providers. And then there are more being reviewed every day. So we've got 313 actually, and Bode Aviation I see is there. So if you want to search for your approved training provider in your state, you can actually use the find feature here. And then you're going to click, type in private pilot and then next. And so you see right here, we've got Cape Fear Aviation for those of you located in North Carolina. Find next, we've got L&W Leasing in Clarksville, Tennessee. And you can actually modify it by the specific state. So if you just wanted to see, the ones that are in Texas, you would unselect all and then go down to Texas and then OK, and it should just tell you right there. Well, it didn't. I wonder why it didn't. Some of these don't work like that, I guess. Let's see, all 50 states. So if they work with other states, maybe that's not the best way to do it. I would use the find feature and just put in the credential that you're seeking and work your way through the list. Now, shortly, we are going to be moving the credentialing assistance program onto something called Army Ignited, where all of this is going to be embedded in Army Ignited. And so that's a great thing. And it, of course, every new thing has learning curves, but I think it's going to, provide you guys with an excellent kind of arsenal of this information, so you don't have to search for it like on an Excel spreadsheet like you do now. So let me check the chat really quick and make sure that I've addressed everybody's questions. I don't think we have anything else. Is there anything that I failed to? I think there was a question earlier regarding, can we begin our paperwork this fiscal year? Yeah, I addressed that, I think. And then I addressed that one. Let's see. What is ES? Sergeant Cueva. Yeah, maybe you said yes instead. EES, does that, can you use a vendor not listed? So the short answer is yes. The long answer is it takes time to get them vetted. So if you go ahead and you fill out the credentialing assistance request with an unapproved vendor, you wouldn't be able to necessarily start the course within that 45-day window. You would most likely have to wait an additional maybe 3 to 6 weeks to allow your vendor to be vetted and approved. And that's the current state of affairs right now. I can see that being expedited as everything kind of moves into the more automation, that automation role. So that's the way things work now. I can see that getting better though. So yes, you can use a vendor that's not approved. Just lead them to that email that I showed you on Army Cool and ask them to send an email that goes directly to headquarters and asks them to send them more information. Any other questions? Great questions you guys are asking.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, I have a question. So I have my CLA and CLT, and I would like to become a proctor for the exam for my state because we only have one testing facility in the Army Corps. How would I go about doing that?
Okay.
What is a CLA? I'm not familiar with that.
That's the Credential Logistics Associated Technician that the Army Corps website offers.
Okay. So we're not talking about private pilot. We're just talking about another credential.
Yes.
Okay. So and you want to know how your credential can be listed on Army Cool or how you can become a testing center, a proctor. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, how I can become a proctor because, like I said, and in New Mexico we only have one or I think we have 2 facilities, but they're centralized in the state, and I would like to be able to bring the credentialing out to those outlying units.
Are you talking about a specific credential? Because if it's a specific credential, you would just have to go through that credential. I mean, the credentialing program is open to everyone across the 50 states. So if you're talking about becoming a proctor for a specific credentialing agency, you would have to connect with that credentialing agency directly to be that proctor. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay. I hope I addressed if I didn't address your question correctly, please, restate it or let me know so I can address it.
You did. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Good. So once I've selected an approved vendor, how do I submit the request or what are the next steps? So I'm grateful that you asked because that was my next presentation here. I'm going to pull up the credentialing assistance request, the current one, and kind of go over that. I know that this is going to change within the coming months, so I don't want you guys to get too excited about it or maybe depressed after you see how much work is involved in it. I'm trying to find it. Let's see. Okay, I found it. Good deal. Okay, so I will go ahead and share my screen with you. This is the latest and greatest version, and you're gonna get two documents. You're gonna get the Statement of Understanding and the Credentialing Assistance Request off of your GoArmyEd account. So you will have to have an active GoArmyEd account. You can't be flagged, of course. And so when you go into GoArmyEd, you're going to create a help desk case, click on Credential Request, and then these two documents will be available for you to download. And here you'll go ahead and find your particular credential. So I'll just click one for the sake of time. And then part two, if you see this blue line, that means that the credential request has not been completed fully. And when you see this blue line turn to green and it'll say data looks good, that means everything that is required has been filled out. And so you can see there's some demographic information here, things about your installation. The training start date is really important. That has to be at least 45 days out from the day that you submit your application. And then the training end date has to be no more than a year out. And then part three, so if you are prepping, if you're taking some sort of training, you're going to put an X in that box. And then you're going to click these fields to enter in the information. So if it's a training, you'll do that, and then it'll come up with the vendor name, the URL for the website, the cost of the training. And that's where Gary was saying that it's really important to have an invoice of some sort so that you can gather that information. And so that has to be filled out. I will say it's kind of important, not kind of, but it is important to connect with your vendor before you submit your credentialing request. So all of this sort of has to be done prior to you submitting your request, because when headquarters calls your vendor to pay them and your vendor doesn't have record of you even being registered for the course, then you'll have to start that process all over again. So for vendors who are familiar with this program, they're going to keep a separate list of those who are paying with the Credentialing Assistance Program. And if your vendors don't know about the process, headquarters is going to be the POC to contact. Once you guys submit your credentialing assistance request and statement of understanding, and I forward it up to headquarters, I have no oversight. I have the same oversight that you have over it. So that means that when you get a notification, I get a notification. Of course, if you get close to that start date and nothing has been paid for, please reach out to me and I can, speed dial somebody's who's in charge up there and have them look at your case. So it's just important to, monitor the help desk case through your GoArmyEd account and ask any questions so that you have a paper trail of the things or issues that are going on, especially in this COVID-19 kind of new world that we're living in. Some trainings are going to be different than they were before. And maybe I know this COVID-19 thing is probably going to go in waves. So if you think you're going to be starting a training and something happens, you just always have to be in communication, letting, folks know at headquarters that maybe your training has been suspended or it's been delayed because they are sticklers when it comes to that end date. And if you haven't submitted your passing grade or your certificate of completion, they're going to wonder where that is and maybe start the recoupment process. So always be in communication via that help desk case. Okay, Let me
Mary?
see if there are any. Yeah, go ahead.
Not to get too far ahead since you're at this spot. So I've already filled out one of these CA requests.
Yeah.
So it's maybe a couple questions, but so let's say I submitted one for multi-engine rating,
Okay.
and the total is going to come out to about $6,000 or somewhere north of 5,000, right?
Okay.
So I put that in there, but I'm actually willing to pay the difference after the 4,000.
Yes.
Is that some, like, at what point will I find out if the credential will be approved, and then they'll let me know, hey, this isn't going to cover the whole thing, but I'm willing to pay for the difference?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So you are going to want to, figure that out with your vendor prior to. So if that credential is in that $6,000 range, and the CA program will pay for 4,000 of that, headquarters is going to say, hey, does this soldier have a payment plan worked out for you to cover the other 2,000? Or, are you guys, working together to make sure that this bill gets paid? Because the last thing they want to do is give the vendor $4,000 and then you not be able to come up with, your chunk of the money to complete the training. So all of that has to be worked out. If you are working with an approved training provider, they will know whether or not the credential request will be approved because they're an approved training provider, right? So there's no kind of like gray area. As long as your credential is listed in GoArmy Army Cool, and as long as you've not started your training prior to it being paid by headquarters, nothing is really going to prevent you from being paid that $4,000 if it, or whatever amount that you're requesting.
Okay. And I guess twofold, if you work with an aviation company such as the one that was just on, so let's say it is going to cost 6,000, is there any way to annotate, hey, I'm going to use 4,000 this year for half the program, and with the expectation that, hey, I'm not going to get a certificate, but once I request a second wave of money for the new fiscal year, then I'll actually complete the certification?
So that boils down to how your aviation folks are billing. And that would be worked out between you and the aviation folks. And I will say that most companies are more than willing to create an invoice that, makes the most use out of your CA dollars.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Any other questions? Let's see. I have one in the chat. If you are going to do this credential over 2 FYs, what would you put for your end date? So if you're going to do it over 2 FYs, that typically means that you've got a phase 1 bill and a phase 2 bill. And I would just make your end date 6 months. Like if you, I reviewed a credentialing request today, and he wants to start it in July and end it in October. And then if it, I don't know really how long the private pilots, he might be doing it full time. I don't know how long or how feasible that is. That's something that the vendor probably would let them know, based on your time and work schedule, if that's something you can do. But then at that point, you can do another credentialing assistance request. Now, remember, you can work on more than one credential at a time. So if you want to give yourself more time, like a year out from that start date, do it, because that's not going to prevent you from submitting another credentialing assistance request. So give yourself, I changed my answer. Give yourself as much time as you want. And of course, work it out with your vendor. See what is feasible for you and your schedule, and they'll let you know. Good questions.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Sure.
If you, what if, for whatever instance, you PCS to a new location that has an approved vendor, is there a specific process for starting with one company where before you're moving to a new company? I guess you kind of understand my question.
The only issue with that would be just to make sure that, there's no vendor swapping with this program. Once you begin at a vendor, you have to make sure that your training is completed at that vendor. So if you can complete, part of your training with a vendor and that's on the invoice, I'm not saying that, you make up your own invoice or you make up your own training. But if you have an opportunity to complete part of your training there before you PCS to another location, you can do that.
So would you recommend maybe shortening those phases in that instance?
That would be something that probably that vendor would know a little bit more about. If that's something that can be done, I don't know if they can shorten it down into quarter phases or things like that. If Gary's still on, maybe he can answer that question.
We haven't had, this is Gary, we haven't had anybody do that where we had to shorten it below the first phase, but we have had several people who PCS'd and we had to reimburse the government. Because they had us reimburse them what was left.
Oh, I see. Okay. So go ahead.
But they still have to get credit for the training that they've completed.
Correct. Right. So they basically had to start all over again, is what you're saying.
That's what they had us do, yes. But
yeah.
I don't know if you could start off with if you knew that you were leaving, you could probably start off with a smaller phase and say, because you're limited to 4,000 a year, correct? And you can do multiple.
Yeah.
So if you knew that your initial training was only going to cover 2,000, we could break it down to that, and then when you leave, you have another 2,000 that you can take to the next vendor.
Yeah.
That
okay,
makes sense.
so it looks like it can be done. You just have to work with your vendors and make sure everybody's on the same page. Did that answer your question, sir?
It did. Thank you very much.
Good. Good deal. Great question. All right. Anyone else? Okay. Well, I think. Oh, do we have somebody else? Okay. Well, I think I'm going to call it a day here. I really appreciate you coming on with your questions. We are excited that you are interested in this private pilot's license, and I hope that you will connect with Gary if you have any follow-up questions, and connect with me if you're interested about using the credentialing assistance program. The first step you can take is by going to goarmyed.com and making sure that you have an active GoArmyEd account. So feel free to do that at your leisure. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.